Brenda, you want to be in charge of picking a person throughout the room so we can get to as many people as we can?
Sure. Well, there's a gentleman and the lady.
I'll be quick. My holistic oncologist also tells me don't have any fruit because of the sugar, but then he tells me to get it in vitamin form. Is that something you suggest?
To get what in vitamin form?
You know, like with your, let's say oranges, like you get vitamin C from that. So instead of having orange or orange juice, he'll tell me to take it in a pill form because you get the vitamin C, but you don't get the sugar. Is that what you suggest?
Well, from my point of view, I advise people avoid synthetic vitamins pretty much completely and take food concentrates, so they still have the actual frequency of the real food. So that would work, but it's a concentrate, not a synthetic. It's not, for example, vitamin C. You wouldn't, but ascorbic acid is not vitamin C. So it's the concentrate of it. So yes, that is what the kind of supplements I suggest.
Tell us about taurine. Taurine, yeah.
Taurine is an amino acid, and it's the one that's most likely to be low on an amino acid quantitative analysis in vegans. So taurine is the limiting amino acid on a vegan diet, and sometimes when a person's a professional athlete or competitive athlete on a vegan diet, we give them extra taurine for that reason. It's the amino acid to watch as you age, because that's the most likely one that can be deficient on a vegan diet. It's usually adequate though when you're in your regular, middle ages and you're eating a healthy diet. And as you said, on the diet style that we're recommending that has a degree of nutritional quality to it, we're more likely to see adequate taurine because people are not wasting their empty calories.
I will say that my experience with age and with cognitive decline or other kinds of brain kind of issues, often there's a taurine deficiency that shows up.
Just has to be said that in the cardiovascular space, you worry about taurine when mixed with caffeine in a energy drink, because people can develop arrhythmias, particularly if they get dehydrated. Then there have been several deaths recorded.
What is the actual amount? What is the actual amount of protein for a male 75 to 85? Well, again, as we've been saying, we are unique individuals. And so I'm going to come back to the mTOR pathway, which is 35 to 70 grams a day, which is way less than a lot of the high protein approaches are. So if you're kind of in that range, you're going to have the more optimal. But with age, you're going to need a little bit more protein, maybe 50. For me, it's about 50 grams. Okay? That's it. That's all I need. I'm a person that doesn't need much protein. And I have to have a lower fat and protein diet for my constitution, if that answers the question. Now, you may need more protein, but 70 is where I would be a little careful.
We can see with a person as they're getting older, if they're getting frail, losing muscle mass, losing strength, it's some suspicion maybe we'll draw an IGF-1 on them. And we'll see the average American's IGF-1 is usually around above 240 or is above 200. Vegans run about 150. We're trying to get people's IGF-1 lower. But if it's starting to get too low, below 90, or it gets 60 or 50, and when you're looking more frail and your strength is going down, then we want to increase your protein enough to get your IGF-1 maybe above 100.
Do you have a plant-based powder protein?
Yes, exactly. You can have a plant-based protein powder that would work. That's correct.
They seem to work really well. They're actually very high concentration of protein and assimilability. So that's a good way to spirulina, chlorella, blue-green algae, plant-based proteins, pea protein. There's a lot of range out there.
Right, but we find a lot of elderly vegans who are doing fine with their IGF-1 and their protein levels and don't have that problem with bioavailability going down. So we're all agreeing it should be individualized. We don't want to just make a blanket statement for all people like that.
And just so you know, the RDA for protein is 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight. And what we've seen is that in the vegan community, people that get too little protein actually have increased risk of fracture as well, of bone fracture. So it is important to get enough. Now, 0.8 grams per kilogram, if you're eating a very whole food plant-based diet, so no processed foods, and you're not eating tofu and soy milk, for example, then sometimes we would suggest adding 10% to that, just to allow for the reduced digestibility of protein from high fiber plant foods.
And as was edamame and tempeh, and dried soybeans are also excellent sources of protein, besides the hemp seeds and the high source protein plant foods too.
Hi, I wanted to ask a question that I've been a vegetarian a long time, and my issue is I have MTHFR AA, and I have difficulty having enough iron. So what can I do to increase my, so I am worried, blood cells, I guess, and iron? I take iron, the liquid, but it doesn't seem to work.
Where's the person?
I can take that. It's challenging for some people, for sure. Now, you want to make sure you're looking at not just your serum ferritin, but your hemoglobin and hematocrit as well, because serum ferritin does tend to run a little bit lower in people eating plant-based diets, and this is thought to actually be quite an advantage because high iron levels tend to act as a sort of a pro-oxidant in your body and can actually increase your risk of disease. So having a lower serum ferritin and a little bit lower stored iron tends to be favorable, if anything. You don't want it too low, but somewhat low. But in terms of increasing your iron status, one of the things that you want to do, there are really two things. You want to reduce the inhibitors of iron absorption. So for example, the two biggest inhibitors are phytates and polyphenolic compounds like tannins in tea. So when you're eating your meal, you're not sprinkling wheat bran on your breakfast cereal, and you're not drinking a cup of tea with your meals. So you would separate tea from your meal by a couple of hours, because you can actually reduce iron absorption by 90%. But usually 50 to 90% with the cup of tea with the meal or with the bran sprinkled on top. So that's one thing. And the second thing is you want to enhance the things that help you absorb iron. And there we're talking mostly about vitamin C and organic acids that would come from fruits and vegetables. And also there are other novel things like carotenoids in carrots, like some of the compounds in ginger and garlic that can actually enhance the absorption of iron as well. So you want to maximize those things that help you absorb it. So if you're having beans, you're having red peppers with the beans or something that's a good source of vitamin C and organic acids, and then you're wanting to minimize those inhibitors of absorption.
And lastly, since you can only absorb so much iron at one time, you might increase your iron absorption by having it 3 times a day at every single meal rather than just once a day. Because you're limited to how much you can absorb at one time. So just taking a higher dose doesn't work. You're better off taking a lower dose, but taking it 3 separate times. And
I actually recently had a friend who came up with low iron, and so we decided to try adding lentils to her breakfast. So instead of just a whole grain fruity kind of breakfast, she added lentils. And her iron, it really helped. Lentils are, within each food group, there are foods that are a little bit more concentrated in iron, and lentils in the legume group are a little bit more concentrated in iron.
Just one more thing to the iron question. There may be many factors why women live a little bit longer than men, but some people hypothesize that their iron is a little bit lower. What Brenda was talking about is the oxidant effect, and I think particularly in the brain function, I think excess iron can actually cause some inflammation, oxidative inflammation in the brain. So it's not a goal to have the highest iron, of course, in the room, just to make the point.
Sure.
Yes, hello. I want to thank you for all the information, but what I'm also interested in with all the information is how best to get tested, like with some of these levels, like which type of doctor can you go to, if you're not able to go to a facility. And are there, like, I have one specific test I want to ask about, and that's the cholesterol test. I know I was tested once and was told that my LDL was really fluffy or something. I didn't really understand it. But is there a special LDL test? And the other thing is just, which doctor do we go to get what we need to be tested?
So this whole area of advanced lipid testing has been sort of controversial within cardiology, within lipidology. We have most of our trials are really focused on just large populations where there's a variety and you're sort of treating the average LDL density. But it is very clear that dense LDL particles tend to drive more plaque development than the buoyant, fluffier LDL. And so the other correlate with that is your triglyceride level. The people who have very high triglycerides tend to have more dense LDL particles. Our last set of lipid guidelines from November from the American College of Cardiology, American Heart Association actually have enough outcome studies to say that we really should be measuring for people in whom there's a question of whether or not they're at risk. It does make sense to measure the LDL density as well as measuring that one little molecule, LP little a, lipoprotein A, which is puts some people genetically at risk for more heart attacks, stroke and death, despite having a reasonable LDL. So these tests are actually available. If you went to your doctor and said you wanted a LDL particle size, they could order it from Quest. But there are specialty labs. Probably shouldn't say their names out loud, but you can just Google them and you will find they're pretty easy to access.
What's your view on oxidized LDL?
Yeah, and actually each one of those that does the advanced lipid testing will do the advanced lipid testing as well, or the oxidized LDL.
Yeah, you go ahead. Just, yeah. Yeah, the two at the front there. Let's do it.
Thank you very much. You guys are a great panel, and it's just amazing to have you all here in our own backyards, and thank you for coming, and thank you for continuing to come. Okay. So my question was, actually, I have one for you, Dr. Fuhrman, and that is, since angiogenesis is such an important aspect of cancer, what foods in particular do you feel are the most angiogenic outside of mushrooms, obviously, to consume, and how would you have them?
Well, the question is about the anti-angiogenic potential of foods.
Right.
Because we know that extra insulin and extra IGF-1, which are growth promoting, promote angiogenesis, and promote cellular replication, which is one of the factors that hormonally drives excess cancer. And the anti-angiogenic foods are the same foods that are high in phytochemicals that protect against cancer. And one of the mechanisms which they protect against cancer, besides their supporting the NRF2 transcription proteins, which fuel the antioxidant response element in the cells. That's one aspect, which flavonoids and isothiocyanates from green vegetables. But these same foods that have the anti-cancer effects have anti-angiogenic potentials. So besides mushrooms, it's berries and pomegranates and tart cherries also have also, by the way, pomegranates have some anti-aromatase activity as well against breast cancer, the same way as tamoxifen does. And mushrooms have anti-aromatase activity as well. And so we're talking about green vegetables, beans, onions and scallions, berries and pomegranate and cherries and some other fruits that probably fit those same categories. And what am I leaving out?
Broccoli?
Broccoli, you said?
Yeah.
Green cruciferous vegetables, yes.
Right,
yes,
absolutely.
yes.
And my other question would be, if you eliminated alcohol, would it help eliminate major issues as far as health goes?
If you eliminated alcohol, it would eliminate health costs, did you say?
Health issues.
Health issues?
Right.
Well, alcohol is a carcinogen. And so, yes, if the population eliminated alcohol, you would save a host of different health problems that would be better in our society. Sure.
Hi there. I was wondering about tofu and soy-based proteins, as well as even wheat gluten for protein? Because I noticed that hasn't been mentioned pretty much at all in terms of protein sources.
I think Dr. Fuhrman did mention soy, edamame, and you said tempeh, absolutely. There have been concerns for men that it somehow will feminize you because of the phytoestrogens, and that actually there are case reports, I'm aware of 2 of them, but it took about a half a gallon or more for that to, per day for that to happen. So I'm not sure that's something that's going to happen on a routine basis.
And I would add just think about this. 2 out of the 5 blue zones use soy as dietary staples. So if the healthiest, longest lived people in the world use soy as a dietary staple, it's probably not poison. But what we need to understand is that I think number 1, we want to choose organic soy. And number 2 is that we don't want it to be overly processed. So we want edamame, soybeans, tempeh, tofu, I think, is a good option as well. Certainly a common option in the blue zones for sure. And so rather than the soy protein isolate concentrates that we get from protein powders or veggie meats, not that you can never eat these things, but they shouldn't be a dietary staple.
Just to add to that all the processed soy necessarily produce MSG in the processing. So the wholer you have it, the better it is, because that's a big issue, particularly for brain function and so forth. I think we need to consider that.
Right, concentrated soy protein, not whole soy foods, but the isolated protein can also raise IGF-1 too high, like meat products do.
And the other thing is, if it's not organic, it can be extracted using a compound called hexane, which is a neurotoxin. We're not sure how much of the hexane might remain in the product, but it is a concern and just another reason to choose organic.
And genetically engineered soy is maybe 90% of soy that's out there is genetically engineered, roughly speaking. So you really, if you're going to have soy, you need to go organic.
Hello. Yes, I have a question about 5G and radiation and how it may impact nutrition absorption and your body's ability to digest and get the proper nutrition from your food. And I don't mean just 5G, I mean all types of wireless radiation and how that might affect your body's ability to absorb nutrients and be able to digest them. Thank you.
It's a pretty complicated question. I will mention that there is some research suggesting that, there's a lot of health problems with, 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G. And the suggestion is 5G will be 100 times, literally 100 times worse. One particular thing with the 5G that may be happening is a decrease in melatonin secretion, which will alter our overall physiology. The second thing that I read about in my paper is the Schumann resonance and also, as I said, the global electric kind of beam there. Our whole physiology is affected by that. So when you start altering the global electric circuit or the Schumann resonance, which is what 5G, particularly from the satellites, would do, it's going to greatly affect our whole physiological pattern. So it's kind of an unknown. We know there are diseases that you get from it, but I don't know if they're as specific, at least in my understanding, they're going to have this nutritional deficiency or that. I don't think they're that far in seeing it. I know we have fertility problems. We have, type 2 diabetes is increased. Heart problems are increased. Cancer is increased. There's a lot of major chronic diseases that are activated with the 3, 4, 5G. But exact nutrient, I'm not personally not aware of behind an alteration in the melatonin, decrease in melatonin, which we need for really being healthy and protect against cancer.
Does the addition of mustard in some form to kale, spinach, cruciferous vegetables, does that enhance the bioavailability of its nutrients, especially to cruciferous vegetables?
That's a complicated question. I'll try to explain it as quickly as possible. There's an enzyme in the cell wall of cruciferous vegetables called myrosinase, which is heat sensitive. Myrosinase catalyzes the reaction of the glucosinolates in the center of the cell to the isothiocyanates as the myrosinase capsule is crushed. In other words, as you're chewing vegetables in your mouth, the myrosinase enzyme is mixing with the glucosinolate, forming the isothiocyanates with the powerful anti-cancer effects. The better you chew the vegetable, the more cruciferous vegetable, whether it's broccoli or kale or watercress or arugula or mustard greens, the more anti-cancer compounds that are formed. Myrosinase is heat sensitive. The question is, if you cook the vegetable and destroy the myrosinase, now you have the broccoli and kale in the stomach without producing so much ITCs, and mustard seeds taken on the food could supply some myrosinase to convert some of the unformulated ITCs that are still in your stomach, because they haven't been converted, that can aid their conversion to the ITCs. Yes, that's possible, and it does happen. That's why we recommend eating some raw kale, raw bok choy, raw watercress, raw arugula on your salad to help you convert some of the cooked green vegetables you're eating, because you have some of that raw myrosinase going into your digestive tract. But better than that even is that when we make a soup or something with cooked vegetables, we blend the mustard greens or the kale or the collards while it's still raw in the blender, so we let the raw myrosinase form the ITCs in the blender. And then we pour it into the soup to cook, because the cooking process doesn't destroy the ITCs, it just destroys the myrosinase that would have formulated the ITCs. So you can still eat cooked cruciferous vegetables in your stews and your soups if you blended them when they were still raw. But yes, adding mustard seed or arugula or watercress or other cruciferous vegetables raw do get you help a little bit of the conversion from the cooked greens that you ate. But also, that's when we wok vegetables, when we wok cabbage and broccoli, we use a timer on our phone, or we do it for only 5 to 6 minutes. We don't keep overcooking the vegetable, because you still get myrosinase activity in broccoli and cabbage when you wok it for 6 minutes or less. It's when you cook it from 6 to 10, or when you make it soggy and mushy, or you really overcook it, that you destroy all that activity. So a combination of factors we're using in the cooking method to maximize the intake of those foods. Is that what you're referring to? Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you all for being here. My question is the relationship between lectins and legumes. Can you explain whether it's not so good, or got to get rid of some of the lectins? Thank you.
You do that one.
Well, lectins are fairly prevalent in the food supply. In almost all foods, there are some lectins. And these are compounds that can cause blood cells to agglutinate or kind of stick together. And they can be problematic if you're eating a fair bit. And there are all kinds of different lectins. Some are damaging to health. Others are actually very protective against cancer. There's one lectin they're doing research on in Japan that they're actually thinking of using as a kind of a therapy for cancer. So there are all types of different lectins. However, the lectins in legumes, especially large legumes, now the ones in small legumes and peas tend to not be so problematic, but the ones in large legumes like kidney beans, there are these lectins called hemagglutinins, and they're really quite potent. And so a lot of people are selling these books that, like the Plant Paradox, for example, they're saying, you've got to avoid these foods because they contain lectins. But the reality is, when you soak legumes, you get a significant reduction in these compounds. But when you cook them, you pretty much completely destroy the lectins. I mean, not 100%, but certainly the vast majority, well over 98%, are generally destroyed if they're adequately cooked. And so these, these pressure cookers, the instant pots, And these kinds of cookers, you're going to get even more destruction. And I think of the lectins, which is to me, it's just not a concern because we cook these beans before we eat them. And the only study I know of that showed, very bad adverse effects from eating kidney beans was a study in a hospital where they fed the patients undercooked kidney beans, and you get really sick if you eat undercooked kidney beans. It's like food poisoning. So otherwise, I just don't think it's something most people have to worry about.
There is some research of linking certain sensitivity to certain lectins to your blood type. And type A's will be more susceptible to the beans. Type O's are not going to be affected so much by it. So there's another little factor in there, if you can follow what I'm saying. Without getting into the whole thing, but there's certain foods that, for example, type O's, some of the research suggests, are more sensitive to the lectins in sunflower seeds. Type B to the lectins in sesame seeds, and type A really being quite affected by the beans and legumes. So that's another little factor.
I'd love to see those studies because that's not something I've ever.
There's a whole book on it.
I know there's a whole book on it,
not
but
that
the book has been
not that book. That book has been
scientifically
debunked.
invalidated.
No, this is a book that's only talking about lectins, and I'll think of the name, but it's pretty solid type research.
Let's just say, though, that there's no blood type that doesn't live longer from eating beans. Did you follow that? All blood types of all populations around the world live longer when they eat more beans in their diet. So lectins can't be that bad. And they're not, actually. There's no data to really... we have to have an hypothesis, but you have to prove that hypothesis now with some long-term studies, and all those studies looking at lifespan with hard endpoints, so that people eat more beans live longer.
But people tend to want to do things raw, and truly, you gotta cook the beans. That's just simple, because the antitrypsin, the antihemoglobin factors that you kind of mentioned, they are destroyed with the heat. So if you're going to do beans, you've got to cook them, not just sprout them. Beans or legumes.
As there's been talk about doing away with Obamacare, as medical doctors, what are the major changes that you would like to see to the current health system to support better health?
So let me take that one on. We fought really hard. So we fought really hard to get the affordable health care passed, and the number of people who are uninsured in this country has gone down dramatically, and then any of the reversals have actually increased those numbers lately. And so having the ability to have health care really does make a difference. Having the ability to go someplace and not wait as long before you present for your illness can actually change the outcome of that illness. Having said that, there never has been, even though Medicare, the way it was designed with the MACRA law, which was passed about 3 years after the ACA, MACRA was trying to redesign Medicare for quality and for alternative payment models. And in those alternative payment models represents, I think, an opportunity for people who do prevention to carve out diseases such as patients who have a heart attack and come in and have a stent. And there's a certain amount of cost expenditure that happens by Medicare on average over the next year or two. Why not bundle those successfully and focus on lifestyle change? If you can take that person and change the way that they're eating right there in the coronary care unit, sign them up for phase 1 cardiac rehab, and then phase 2, have them successfully complete one of those, particularly the advanced, now that Medicare pays for them, one of the advanced cardiac rehabilitation programs, you will drop the healthcare costs significantly. And with Medicare, you can actually do that as a shared savings program, and it'll be better for the institution and for Medicare and obviously for the country.
I have a little different idea. My idea, instead of waiting till a person actually has the stent, to actually teach nutrition in elementary schools and make it a required curriculum, that it's reading, writing, arithmetic, and nutritional science, because it should be something that's taught all through the educational process, and not expect doctors to be able to teach people nutrition. They're just, everyone should know about nutrition and not wait till they have a severe medical problem to realize it's something they should have learned about. So
that's why I honor this group for paying attention and being so interested, because you need to do that to protect yourself.
And I'd just like to make a comment there as well. I mentioned that I had done research in the Marshall Islands where they have the highest rates of diabetes in the world. And after we did the research, I continued to go back to do interventions for the politicians and the police officers and the teachers and so on. And the last time I went to the Marshall Islands, I was asked to go there to create a nutrition curriculum for grades 1 to 6. And I worked 3 weeks, 16-hour days, and wrote a 150-page curriculum for them. Thank you. Not only that, but we trained every single teacher in every single public school before we left. So it was a big project. But it's exciting to see, just a small country like that, but to actually recognize how important it is to start there.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Other countries are doing more advanced things like that. I went to the Bahamas too, and they spoke to the Department of Health there, and they're producing their food plate and telling you and giving people advice to the whole population to try to improve healthcare costs with much more aggressive nutritional and trying to teach all their educators in schools and having a much more broad spectrum affected health that addressing cause than we do in this country.
Yes.
So I'd like to conclude with each of you giving a 1-minute final thought on anything you'd like to say. I just want to also let everyone know that tomorrow at 9 a.m. Vandana Shiva is speaking. At 11 o'clock, Dr. Fuhrman is speaking. A nutritarian diet is the most effective, healthiest, and sustainable way to resolve obesity and diabetes. At 2 o'clock, Dr. Kim Williams is speaking, Nutrition and Heart Disease, the etiology of cardiovascular mortality. And at 4 o'clock, Brenda Davis is speaking, Designing a Bulletproof Plant-Based Diet, Focus on Nutrients. So I hope everyone will come back tomorrow for the final day to see them. And if you could each conclude with your 1-minute final thought, and then we'll serve the vegan ice cream. I do want to let everyone know that we clearly are not recommending the vegan ice cream. It is soy ice cream. It's high in sugar. We serve it to get people to come to the conference, but in no way is it recommended.
But you have to consult your physician before you eat it.
Which way do we want to start? This end? Well, I guess the thing that I would like to say is it really is an honor and a privilege to be here and to meet so many people who really care about their health, the health of their families. And I know that we're not all at the same place in our journey. But to me, just being at a point where you recognize where the direction you want to go is 90% of the battle. And even if it's just one step at a time, just keep moving in the right direction and sharing what you can share in a way that is filled with love and compassion for the people around you. And I think that's the most, with the greatest tool any to influence those around them is really their own example. So just be the best example that you can be.
Thank you very much. I talk about it a lot. Did really have a career goal wanting heart disease to not be the #1 killer of Americans. It's been over 100 years. I'll talk about that more tomorrow afternoon. And my message, if I had just 60 seconds, is to thank everybody who's here, thank everyone who's online. You're here because you're concerned, and that concern can spread. You've got to be an advocate. You've got to be scientifically sound in what you're talking about. I encourage everyone to evaluate everything that we're all saying in the light of real randomized trials. And if the randomized trials aren't there, let's do them. We needed more and more solid evidence so we can change guidelines, educate physicians, change schools, change even churches, change all of our institutions, get the hospital food to actually improve. And if we work on the political aspect of changing the health direction of this country, people argue that you shouldn't have seatbelt laws because that decreases personal freedom. Well, if a person is injured and it's going to take our tax dollars, then you don't really have the right to not wear your seatbelt. The same thing's true of food. People who are overeating are actually taking away resources from other people. So everyone should be a thin, exercising daily, plant-based person, and take it as your responsibility to save the finances of our healthcare system. It's your patriotic duty.
I just want to acknowledge everyone here for being so interested, so turned on to loving yourself enough to want to heal yourself. Okay, that's a good start. I also really want to thank Steve here for doing a great job.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I really enjoyed being on this panel. Really good, really top line. This is really, really good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good.
I, of course, support everything that was being said. This has been a real positive experience for all of us concerned here, and that nutritional science is a blessing for all of us to not just reverse disease, give us the power to control our health destiny, but also for our families, for our future, for not to have children being dependent on us, to really have a happier future, and to lose that fear that more conventional approach and conventional medicine breeds in people, the fear of being sick, the fear of being in a hospital, the fear of being tortured, being uncomfortable. We really can take control of our lives and have a much happier life, much more hope, and much less suffering, and a better quality of life because of advances in nutritional science, which we all really appreciate.
Good. So I just want to end with a blessing. Vinanda Shiva was talking about the importance of seed and the importance of how everything is connected to everything else, the quantum understanding. And so I want to bless everyone here that we understand that we are a seed to expand and uplift the consciousness on the planet and may be blessed and sprouting really well. Oh.
Thank you.
Very good.